They say the river has a memory. It remembers where it used to flow, centuries before we built our fences, paved our roads, and drew our property lines across the valley floor. Most of the time, the river is a polite neighbor. It stays within the banks we reinforce with stone and concrete, murmuring quietly as it winds its way toward the ocean. But there are days when the sky opens up and the world turns a bruised, angry gray, when the river decides it wants to remember its old shape. It stops being a neighbor and becomes a monster. It wakes up hungry and violent, trying to take back everything we thought we owned. And on those days, you learn very quickly that nature doesn't negotiate. It just takes. It started on a Tuesday just before dawn, with a silence that felt too heavy, the kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums. The air smelled metallic, like ozone and wet dust. A storm system that the weathermen said wasn't supposed to hit us, until nightfall decided to change its mind. It dropped everything it had in 3 hours. We call them cloud bursts out here, but that word makes it sound small, harmless even. This wasn't a burst. This was a deluge. It was as if the sky had simply torn open. The rain didn't fall in drops. It fell in sheets, hammering the roof of my truck with such ferocity that I couldn't hear my own thoughts. I was out checking the perimeter of the sanctuary, driving slowly along the access road that runs parallel to the river. The heater in my old pickup was rattling, fighting a losing battle against the creeping dampness fogging up the windows. The radio was buzzing with weather alerts, a robotic voice cutting through the static to warn of flash floods, road closures, and rising water levels. My head was down, eyes narrowed, focused entirely on the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the gloom, trying to keep the truck from sliding into the ditch. The mud was slick as grease, and every time I tapped the brakes, I felt the back end drift. I was thinking about coffee. I was thinking about turning back. But then, through the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers, I saw it, or I thought I did. It was just a glitch in the gray matrix of the storm, a dark smudge in the middle of the churning brown chaos of the river. I took my foot off the gas and let the truck roll to a halt. The engine idled roughly, vibrating the steering wheel under my hands. I squinted, wiping the condensation off the inside of the glass with my sleeve. The river, usually 100 yards away from the road, was now lapping at the shoulder, and out there, in the center of the torrent, something was moving. It looked like a statue carved out of obsidian, standing stark and impossible against the boiling water. I reached for my binoculars, my fingers fumbling with the focus wheel. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the sinking realization of what I was looking at. The lenses cleared, and the image snapped into sharp, heartbreaking focus. It was a horse, a wild stallion, a bachelor, judging by the scars on his flank and the solitary way he held himself. He must have been crossing the shallows when the flash flood hit, a wall of water coming down from the mountains so fast it cut off his retreat before he could scramble to the other side. Now, he was stranded on a patch of sediment and dying grass no bigger than a pickup truck, and the water was rising. It wasn't just rising, it was raging. Trees, uprooted whole, were tumbling past him like matchsticks, smashing into rocks with sickening cracks. The stallion was soaked, his black coat plastered his ribs, shivering violently. His head was high, ears pinned back tight against his skull, his eyes wide and rolling, showing the whites. He was turning in tight, frantic circles, testing the edge of his shrinking prison. But every time he put a hoof near the water, the bank crumbled away into the brown slurry. I dropped the binoculars on the passenger seat and grabbed the radio mic. I keyed it, my voice sounding strange and tight in the small cab. "Base, this is Carter. I've got a situation at mile marker 4. We have a life in immediate danger. I repeat, immediate danger. Bring the heavy gear. And hurry." I sat there for a moment after the call, watching him, in the wild, Fear is a necessary tool. It keeps you alive. It tells you to run when the wolf pack circles. It tells you to freeze when the cougar screams. But this horse, he had nowhere to run. He was trapped in a liquid cage that was getting smaller by the second. I could see him calculating, his instincts firing rapidly, looking for a path that didn't exist. I knew what he didn't. I knew that the dam 10 miles upstream was nearing capacity. If the engineers opened the spillway to save the dam, the river level would jump another 4 feet in minutes. That island wouldn't just shrink. It would vanish. He would be swept away, battered against the boulders of the rapids downstream, and there would be nothing anyone could do. Time is a funny thing during a rescue. It distorts. It feels like it stops completely. Yet you can see it slipping away in the waterline, creeping up the stallion's legs. Inch by inch, the river was swallowing the ground beneath him. I got out of the truck. The rain hitting me like gravel. I pulled my hood up and walked to the edge of the bank, trying to let him know he wasn't alone. He saw me. He froze, staring right at me across 50 yards of death. A wild stallion sees a human as a predator, not a savior. To him, I was just another threat, a wolf on 2 legs waiting for him to weaken. I didn't have a rope. I didn't have a boat. All I had was my presence, standing in the mud, bearing witness to his terror. Hold on, I whispered, the sound swallowed instantly by the roar of the water. Just hold on, big man. The team arrived in a blur of yellow slickers and splashing mud. I saw the headlights first, cutting through the downpour, then the slamming of doors. Sarah, our lead vet, was the first out, her face grim. Miller, our swiftwater specialist, was right behind her, already uncoiling a heavy throw bag. We didn't need to have a meeting. We didn't need to discuss the odds. One look at the river told us everything we needed to know. No boat could hold steady in that current. The debris would tear a prop or puncture a hull in seconds. A helicopter was out of the question. The ceiling was too low, the wind too erratic. That left us with one option, the oldest option. Flesh and blood against the elements. We had to swim. You don't just jump into floodwater. You have to respect it or it will kill you. You have to read it like a map. Miller walked up the bank, eyes scanning the currents, looking for the seams where the water moved differently. He pointed to an eddy about 50 yards upstream from the stallion's position. We enter there, he shouted over the roar, pointing a gloved hand. We let the current carry us diagonally. We have to time it perfectly. If we miss the island, we miss the horse. And we end up half a mile downriver in the gorge. And if we hit the island, I asked, shouting to be heard, then we have a 1,000-pound panicked animal on a piece of dirt the size of a kitchen table, Miller said, tightening his life vest. And then we figure out part 2. We suited up in silence. Dry suits, helmets, vests with quick-release harnesses. I checked my carabiners, snapping the gates open and closed, a nervous tick. The Stallion. We started calling him Midnight in our heads, just to have a name to hold on to, something to personalize the life we were risking ours for, let out a scream. It wasn't a neigh. It was a challenge, a high, piercing sound that cut through the thunder. He was telling the storm he wouldn't go quietly. He was rearing up, his front hooves slicing the air, fighting an invisible enemy. We moved to the entry point. The mud sucked at our boots, trying to keep us on land, but we pushed forward. I looked back at the truck, at the warm cab, then looked at the black shape in the river. He had stopped rearing and was standing with his head low, shaking. He was getting cold. Hypothermia moves fast in water this icy. If his muscles seized up, he wouldn't be able to swim even if we did get him free. Ready? Miller asked. Ready. I lied. We stepped in. The cold hit like a physical blow, a hammer to the chest that knocked the air right out of my lungs. For a second, my vision narrowed. my brain screaming at me to get back to the warmth. But you kick, you stroke, you fight the instinct to retreat. The water was thick with silt, heavy as wet concrete, and it tasted of dirt and old iron. It grabbed us immediately, accelerating us away from the bank. We were tethered to a safety line held by the team on the shore, but the line was just to keep us from dying. It couldn't help us swim. The world became a blur of brown water and gray sky. Debris bumped against my legs, branches trashed, stones rolling along the riverbed. I kept my eyes locked on the island. It was coming up fast. Too fast. We were human projectiles aiming for a crumbling target. Kick. Kick hard. Miller screamed from my left. We fought the current, crabbing sideways, our arms burning. We hit the mud bank of the island with a thud that knocked the wind out of me again. I dug my fingers into the wet earth, clawing for a hold as the river tried to rip me back. I found a root, exposed and slick, and hauled myself up. Miller scrambled up beside me. We lay there for a second, gasping, spitting out muddy water, hearts hammering against our ribs like trapped birds. We were 10 feet away from him. Up close, he was magnificent, and he was terrifying. He towered over us, a wall of trembling muscle and dark energy. He spun toward us, ears flattened, teeth bared. He didn't know we were there to help. He only knew that 2 strange creatures had just crawled out of the water that was trying to kill him. He reared up, his hooves flashing above our heads. I flinched, rolling to the side as a hoof came down where my shoulder had been a second before, sinking deep into the mud. Easy, I yelled, holding my hands up, palms open. Easy, big man. We've got you. The rain was blinding now, coming down in torrents that stung the skin. The ground beneath our boots felt like jelly, unstable and trembling with the force of the water rushing past. The river was eating the island faster now. I could see chunks of turf the size of suitcases falling off the edges and dissolving. We had maybe 10 minutes before the water swept over the top. Maybe less. The stallion backed away to the very edge of the precipice, his hind legs slipping. He scrambled forward, eyes wide, panic overtaking his defiance. He looked at me, and in that chaotic moment, the storm seemed to fade into the background. It was just me and him. I saw the wildness in him, the ancient, untouchable pride of a creature that has never known a halter. But I also saw the question. It was clear as day in those dark, terrified eyes. Are you deaf, or are you a chance? I lowered my voice, pitching it under the wind. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. But we have to go. We have to go now. Miller moved to my right, his movement slow and deliberate despite the urgency. We didn't have a halter. We couldn't get close enough to put one on without getting kicked into the river. We didn't have a tranquilizer gun. If we sedated him, he would drown instantly. We had a rope, a simple braided nylon line with a quick release loop. We had to get it over his neck, not to choke him, but to guide him, to give him an anchor, to show him which way was safety. I'm going to cast, Miller said, coiling the rope. If I miss, we might not get another shot. He's too skittish. Do it, I said, locking eyes with the horse. Miller threw. The loop opened up in the gray air, a perfect circle spinning against the chaos of the rain. It seemed to hang there for a second, defying the wind, before settling gently over the stallion's head. The reaction was instant and violent. The rope touched his neck, and midnight exploded. He bucked, twisting in the air, screaming in frustration. He didn't understand. He thought he was being captured. He fought the rope, pulling back with all his strength. And that was the moment the island gave up. The ground beneath his hind legs simply sheared off. One moment he was fighting us. The next, he was falling backward. He's in. Miller screamed, his voice cracking. There was a massive splash. swallowed by the roar of the river. The horse vanished into the brown churn. The rope in my hand snapped taut instantly, turning into a live wire that burned through my gloves. The force of it jerked me forward, dragging me face first into the mud. I slid toward the edge, toward the water. "Grab him," I yelled, digging my boots into the sludge. Miller threw himself onto the line behind me, adding his weight. The river had him now. It grabbed the stallion and spun him around like a toy boat. He surfaced 10 yards downstream, head high, nostrils flared red, sucking in air and water. He was swimming, thrashing his legs, but the current was too strong. It was dragging him toward the center of the channel, toward the rapids where the water turned white and lethal. It became a tug-of-war with the reaper. The horse was swimming for his life, but the geometry was all wrong. The current was pushing him away. We were pulling him back. The rope vibrated, singing with tension. If I let go, he was gone forever. If I held on and he got caught in a snag, he might pull me in with him. I scrambled to my feet, wrapping the line around my waist. A stupid move, a desperate move that broke every safety protocol in the book. But I couldn't lose him, not after looking him in the eye. I dug my heels into the mud of the riverbed until the water was rushing over my boots. "Pull!" I yelled to the team on the bank, who were holding our safety line. "Pull us in, all of us." The stallion went under. 1 second he was there, a black head against the brown water, and then nothing, just swirls. My heart stopped in my chest. The line went slack in my hands. The horror of that sensation is something I can't describe. The sudden absence of weight that means the life at the other end is gone. The silence of that moment was louder than the thunder. I stood there, waist deep in the freezing water, holding a limp rope, staring at the spot where he had vanished. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." We waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then the rope jerked. A violent, heavy tug that almost pulled me off my feet. He breached like a whale, exploding out of the water closer to the bank, gasping, coughing, eyes wild. He had found footing on a submerged rock shelf, a hidden ridge of stone beneath the surface. He wasn't swimming anymore. He was climbing. I reeled in the slack, hand over hand, shouting encouragement that he couldn't hear. Come on, boy." And then it happened, the shift, the moment the rescue turned from a capture into a partnership. He stopped fighting the rope. He stopped pulling away from us. He realized, through the panic and the noise, that the tension on his neck wasn't holding him back. It was holding him up. It was a lifeline. He leaned into it. He looked at me, water streaming down his face, mixing with the mud and the foam, and he trusted me. For 5 seconds, a wild animal, born and bred to fear the scent of man, trusted a human with his life. He lunged forward. We pulled. The team on the bank pulled. It was a chain of survival. Humans and horse linked by intent and nylon. Together, Miller shouted, his voice raw. The stallion threw his weight forward. Muscles rippled under his wet fur, powerful haunches bunching and firing. His hooves clawed at the slippery mud of the bank, tearing up roots and grass. He slipped, went down to his knees, groaned a deep guttural sound of exhaustion, and scrambled again. With one final massive heave, he pulled himself up and over the lip of the bank. He collapsed on the wet grass, safely away from the water. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to stand. He just lay there, flat out, his sides heaving like bellows, steam rising from his body in the cold air. We collapsed right next to him. I fell onto my back, staring up at the rain, which was finally, mercifully, starting to lighten. I could feel the vibration of the earth beneath me, or maybe it was just the adrenaline fading from my own body, leaving me shaking and weak. I couldn't speak. My lungs burned. My arms felt like lead, but I was grinning. I looked over at Miller. He was covered in mud, bleeding from a cut on his cheek, and he was grinning too. After a few minutes, the stallion lifted his head. He blinked, shaking the water from his ears. I crawled over to him, moving slowly, staying low. Usually you don't touch a wild stallion. It's a violation of their space, a risk to your safety. But in that moment, the rules of the ordinary world didn't apply. We had crossed the threshold together. I reached out and put a hand on his neck. He flinched, a ripple of skin shivering under my palm. But he didn't pull away. He was incredibly warm, a furnace of life against the cold rain. "You made it," I whispered. "You made it." We gently loosened the rope. The friction had rubbed the hair away on his neck, leaving raw, red skin, battle scars from a war he had just won. He closed his eyes as the loop slackened, letting out a long, shuddering breath. I watched his ribs expand and contract, the simple, beautiful rhythm of a life continuing. Slowly, painfully, the strength returned to him. He tucked his front legs under his chest and pushed. He wobbled, slipped, then tried again. With a grunt of effort, he rose to his feet. He stood there, swaying slightly, water dripping from his long tail. He towered over us. He was muddy, bruised, exhausted, and thin from winter, but he was still a king. He shook himself, a massive, full-body shudder that sent a spray of water flying over us, and tossed his head. He took a step toward the tree line, toward the safety of the forest. Then he stopped. He turned his head and looked back. He looked right at me. Animals don't say, "Thank you." They don't understand gratitude the way we do. They don't owe us anything. But that look, it was an acknowledgement. It was a recognition. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and for a heartbeat, we understood each other. We were just two living things that had cheated death together. A silent pact was signed in the rain. And then, with a flick of his black tail, he was gone. He melted back into the dark green of the pines like a ghost, silent and swift. The only proof he was ever there were the deep, sliding hoof prints in the mud and the empty rope lying coiled at my feet. We packed up our gear in silence. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving us cold and aching. The river was still roaring, still tearing at the banks, but it didn't sound angry anymore. It just sounded like nature, indifferent, powerful, relentless. It had tried to take a life today, and we had snatched it back. That was enough. We drove back to the base with the heater blasting. Nobody turned on the radio. We just watched the road, the windshield wipers counting time. People ask me why we do it. Why risk human lives for an animal that will never know our names? Why fight so hard, spend so much money, and take so many risks for a creature that belongs to the wild, that has no value to the bank or the market? They ask why we didn't just let nature take its course. I think about that question a lot. I think about it when I'm cold and wet and tired. But then I remember the feeling of that rope vibrating in my hands. I remember the look in Midnight's eyes when he realized he wasn't alone. We do it because life is fragile. We do it because the world is rough and heavy and constantly trying to wash us away. We do it because standing your ground matters, and helping someone else stand theirs, whether they have 2 legs or 4, matters even more. In a world that can be so cruel, the act of saving something is the only rebellion we have. That stallion taught me something that day, something I carry with me every time the clouds turn gray. No matter how high the water rises, no matter how small the ground beneath your feet gets, and no matter how loud the thunder screams, as long as you have breath in your lungs, you fight, you kick, you climb, you fight until you find the shore. And if you're lucky, maybe, just maybe, there's a hand reaching out to help you pull yourself up. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that every life, no matter how wild, is worth fighting for, Share this with someone who needs a reminder to never give up, because we all get stuck in the rising water sometimes. And we all need to know that there's hope on the other side of the storm. I'll see you in the next one.